Push this, get started.
Okay, awesome. Alright, so we're going to be in Daniel 3 today. We're going to be in Daniel 3, and we're going to go through the whole chapter. Now, this is probably one of the most famous chapters in Daniel. We are going to talk about the fiery furnace today. But before we get started, if anyone was here last week, there was a couple of you here last week. Does anyone remember what we talked about last week? Those of you who were here.
The dream.
The dream, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And what did Nebuchadnezzar see in his dream?
Statue.
A big old statue. Okay, so remember we had this big old statue and it was made of all these different parts, right? So he had, we're just gonna go quick this morning. Okay, so remember that we had the head of gold and we had a silver body and we had bronze and we had iron and we had clay and iron mixed together, right? And so we had this huge statue that Nebuchadnezzar sees in his dream. And then we see this meteor come and just hit the feet, and then he becomes just a pile of rubble, right? And then the big stone comes, and God sets up a kingdom, and it turns into a mountain, okay? So Nebuchadnezzar sees this, and he's absolutely terrified, right? And he calls all of his wise men together because he wants to know the interpretation of this dream. Well, at the end of the story, Daniel ends up being able to see the dream and its interpretation. And he tells Nebuchadnezzar what it means. It tells him that these are going to be kingdoms that are going to come after him, but that Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold. Okay? And eventually, all the kingdoms of the world are going to come to nothing, and God is going to set up his eternal kingdom. So God, through Daniel, is trying to get Nebuchadnezzar here, right? What we're going to find out is Nebuchadnezzar stops here. Nebuchadnezzar hears this and doesn't listen to the rest of it. Okay? He only hears, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. And he doesn't hear anything else Daniel says. Because chapter 3, we're going to find out what Nebuchadnezzar did. So, chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar heard, you are the head of gold. And he goes, great, I'm going to make my own image of gold. So Nebuchadnezzar sets out and he creates his own image of gold. Now, we don't know if this was an actual a whole statue made out of gold. It could have been what we call an obelisk, which is basically a triangle. And he could have put his image in it, sort of thing. So this is more along the lines of what you see nowadays in that region. It kind of looks like this, so it kind of has the form of a man, right? But it's more like an obelisk shape. So this could have been what he did. Now we know that it wasn't of pure gold because it is massive. Verse 1 says, whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth was 6 cubits. Okay, so I know, nobody here knows what a cubit is, right? So cubit is about from your elbow to your arm. That's how they would measure, okay? So this statue is 90 feet high and 9 feet across, which is why we think it's more kind of like this shape because it's really small on the bottom, but it goes up 90 feet, okay? This is how huge and massive this statue is, and it's made out of gold. We're told that. More than likely, it's wood on the inside and gold on the outside. Okay? Still, that's a lot of gold, right? That is a huge statue of gold. Okay? So, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Okay? So, in light of chapter 2, when Nebuchadnezzar has this vision, instead of taking it as a warning, instead of making the most of his kingdom, he sets up his own image of himself, of pure gold. Okay? Verse 2. Then King Nebuchadnezzar set together the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar decides to gather up all of the important people in his realm. Okay? Now, This plain, we're told that it's on the plain of Dura. So it's outside of Babylon on a plain, or just a big piece of property that he owns, okay? Now, when you would go out there to build, you're building on sand. What happens when you build something on sand, especially that's 90 feet high?
It's gonna fall.
It's gonna fall over, right? So they wouldn't have built it on sand, they would have built a platform, okay, to set the image up on. Do you know what stands that we found in the, I think it was the 18th century in Dura? We found a platform, okay? And we found a platform that stood about 20 feet high, okay? And it was 46 feet wide. 46 feet wide. This huge platform where nothing's standing on it. But they can gather by this platform that's sitting out there that there was an image out there. Now, of course, the image isn't there, so we don't know what image was out there, but the platform still remains, okay? Because they had to build this platform enough to hold this image, right? So the image is gone, but the platform still remains. Now, a strap in the Persian, it just means kind of like a protector of the realm. So these are all different types of protectors, public officials. He's gathering everybody up to come dedicate his statue. Okay, he's invited everybody. Now, verse 3 continues and it says, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and the herald proclaimed. Okay, so a herald was a guy who was paid to come out there and just yell really, really loud, right? They didn't have microphones there, they didn't have a sound system set up, so they would pay somebody who had a really voice that could project. So this is a herald who is projecting out loud. You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Okay? So if you don't like lists, Daniel 3 is going to be really hard to get through because there's a lot of lists in Daniel 3. Okay? So they tell them that Nebuchadnezzar has created this humongous orchestra. It's every kind of instrument that you can think of. The pipe and the lyre and the trigon and the harp and the bagpipe, not Scottish bagpipe, okay? These are Greek instruments. Kind of would be similar, but not the same thing. So he amasses this huge orchestra at the dedication of this image, okay? Verse 6, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Okay, so you don't get any second chances here. He says if you don't fall straight down when you hear that music, there is a fiery furnace. Okay, I have no idea what the fiery furnace looks like, so we're just going to do this. Okay, you are immediately cast into the fiery furnace. Do we know why the fiery furnace was built? Because Nebuchadnezzar has to make this whole thing out of gold, okay? And so he had to have a fiery furnace in order to mold all of this gold, okay? So this is what it was originally set up to be, okay? But he has it still, so he's going to use it, okay, as a threat to the people who do not obey. So they are to be obeyed, and you shall immediately be cast into the fiery furnace. Verse 7. Therefore, as soon as all of people heard the sound of the horn and the pipe and the lyre and the trigon and the harp and the bagpipe and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Okay? So as soon as you were to hear the music, you fell down and started worshiping. Okay? So this command was backed up with a pretty powerful threat. Nebuchadnezzar regarded the refusal to worship this image, okay, as absolute treason. This was not a religious choice. This was treason if you did not worship this image, okay? So he was going to kill you if you did not do this, okay? So he would not allow anyone to go unpunished. Now, we have what are called cuneiform writings. So Babylon wrote things down and they recorded things just as we do. We have one of these from that time period that describes Nebuchadnezzar. And this is what it reads. He did not rest day and night, And then it goes into great detail about a criminal who had committed an offense against Nebuchadnezzar, okay? He gets passed off on the first offense, but on his second offense, he is decapitated, so his head gets chopped off. Nebuchadnezzar then has a stone image created of the man's head, and he sets it up on display as a warning. This is what happens when you cross me. This is what happens when you perform treason against me, okay? So we have seen lots of different forms of this. If you've ever seen like the Pirates of the Caribbean movie where they leave the pirates' bones hanging up after they hang them, it's a warning, okay? It's very similar. But we have that description of what Nebuchadnezzar did to that man, okay? So Nebuchadnezzar's grand image is accompanied by this huge, elaborate orchestra that's there. Now remember, music is just a tool. We were talking about tools earlier. Music can be used for good or evil, okay? The musicians in and of themselves were just people who knew how to play these instruments, but Nebuchadnezzar was using them for his worship, okay? And then this literally means as soon as you heard that music, you fell down. And if you hesitated, that was it, okay? All right, so let's read the rest of it. We're going to read up to the fiery furnace. Verse 8. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Now, wait a second. Who are we talking about here? We have to go back to Daniel 2. In Daniel 2, at the end of it, we're told because of what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did with Daniel, they prayed, they asked for God's mercy to show them the king's dream. They had been promoted, okay? So they're over the provinces of Babylon. Now remember, these are teenagers, okay? We're talking like 17 to 19-year-old guys, okay? So these other Chaldeans did not like this whatsoever, okay? They did not like being ruled by these foreign teenagers, okay? So they use this as an opportunity, okay? And it says they maliciously accused, which means that they had premeditated intent to look for something to accuse these people for, okay? Verse 9 says, they declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews who you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Okay? So, they aren't calling out all the Jews, because remember, it's not just Daniel and his 3 friends. There's a whole gathering that has come into Babylon at this point. Okay? But they point out specifically these certain Jews. So what does that tell us? All the other Jews are falling down and worshiping the statue, okay? They have complied by doing this. Now, we don't know the intent of the heart. We don't know if they're still worshiping God or if they have rejected him as it has seemed that he has rejected them. But only these 3 have not fallen down. He names them by name, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These people have not fallen down to worship you, okay? Now, isn't it interesting that in a crowd of, let's roughly estimate thousands, probably more than that, tens of thousands of people, these Chaldeans saw 3 men. You think they were looking for them. You think that they were trying to find something, okay? So out of this humongous crowd, they noticed that these 3 men are not falling down. But remember, these 3 men did not lodge a formal protest. Remember, like Daniel did with the food, okay? He said, this is crossing a boundary, okay? I'm not going to put anything in my body that my God doesn't want in my body. So he files a formal protest. They're not filing a formal protest. They are literally just not participating in the worship, okay? So they are quietly rebelling. I'm not going to bow down to this image. It's not my God, okay? So they simply refrain. Okay, now let's move on to verse 13. And it says, then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar is furious. He is fuming mad, okay? Because these three men did not fall down. But wait a second, what was the decree? If you do not fall down immediately, where were you supposed to go? To the fiery furnace. Where does he bring them? To the throne room, okay? Because he's going to give them the benefit of the doubt. That's how much they have impressed him. Anybody else, they would have been in the furnace, and Nebuchadnezzar would have been having this conversation. He's going to give them the benefit of the doubt. So they get brought before him, okay? Verse 14. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up?" Okay? Now, in a crowd of tens of thousands, is it really easy not to bow down? Yeah, right? Most of us probably wouldn't have. Okay? Well, I'm not going to bow down to that. They're not ever going to see me. When you stand in front of the king, and it's just you and your two friends, and he says, "Is this true?" It's really hard to say, yes. Yeah, it is. I'm not going to bow down. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar point blank asks them, "Is it true that you have not done this? Now, if you are ready to hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good." Okay? But if you don't worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Okay? So he says, all right, boys, I'm going to give you a second chance. Okay? Now you kind of hear Nebuchadnezzar recognizes that they're young. Okay? And he really likes them because they just interpreted his dream, right? So he said, I'm going to give you one more chance. Go out there, when you hear the music, fall down, because I really don't want to kill you, right? Or you're going to be immediately thrown into the fire. This is your last chance. I'm only giving you one more. But then he goes so far as to say, and who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Okay? Remember, he set up a statue to himself. He really thinks that he's a God. Okay? He deserves all of the worship. And he asks, who is the God who will deliver you? Well, Nebuchadnezzar, the same God who gave you that dream. Okay? This is probably a couple of years later. We're not exactly sure when he sets up this image, and it probably would have taken a while to build an image that's 90 feet high. But we're not far removed from this event. Okay? Maybe a couple of years. Maybe a couple of years. Nebuchadnezzar's already forgotten his dream. He's already forgotten the God of Meshach and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he asks him, who's the God who's going to deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answer him, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, meaning if we don't fall down and you throw us into the fire, if this is true, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. Okay? So they are going to challenge Nebuchadnezzar here that not only is their God able to save them out of the fire, but he's going to save them from whatever else Nebuchadnezzar can come up with. Okay? He is going to rescue us out of your hands as well. Okay? So, but there's a contingency. But if not, be it known to you, O king, because this might be the last time we stand in front of you. May it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So even if God doesn't get us out of the fiery furnace, even if God doesn't take us out of your hands, we're not going to worship your image. We're not going to worship your gods. Okay? Because at this point, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't even know what's going to happen. Because they're getting ready to head back outside, and that music's going to play. And they're going to have a choice to make. Okay? Am I going to fall down or not? And they've already told him, we're not going to. You can throw us in the fire, you can do whatever you want with us. Either God's going to deliver us, or he's going to remove us out of your hands anyway. Okay? That was all for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay? So verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression on his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay, so we know because his countenance changed that what would it have been before that? He would have been looking on them with compassion, with mercy, basically pleading, please don't make me do this, okay? Because of everything that's happened with these three men up until now, he doesn't want to do this. Now, does Nebuchadnezzar have any problem killing people?
No.
Absolutely not. He has massacred thousands at this point in his life, okay? There's no problem throwing them into the fire furnace. But he doesn't want to do it to these three men, okay? So he's basically pleading with them. When we get to verse 19, that's all done. He's done, okay? They're not going to do it, and he's going to save face, okay? He's not going to stand for this rebellion, even with these three people, okay? So the expression on his face changed. Again, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times more than usual. Why does he do this? Because he absolutely knows what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are about to do. He absolutely knows that if he sends them outside and that music starts playing, they're not going to do it. And he's going to have to go through with his threat. Okay? Now, why 7 times hotter?
Incinerated immediately.
They would be incinerated immediately. So what do we see in his judgment?
There's a little bit of compassion there still.
Mercy.
He made it quick.
Mercy. You see mercy. Okay? He does not want to do this. He does not want to do this. But if he's going to have to do it, he's going to show it the ounce of mercy that he can. Okay? This is a theme in the Old Testament. When you see judgment, there's always mercy there. Look for the mercy, okay, because it's there. All right, so he tells his men, go out there and I want you to heat that furnace 7 times. Because I'm getting ready to go through on my threat, and I know they're getting ready to go through on their promise. Okay, we're going to show a little bit of mercy. All right, so 7 times more than it is usually heated. Verse 20. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay? They obviously went outside. They obviously did what they said they were going to do. Now Nebuchadnezzar has to do what he has to do. And he cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their outer garments, and they were thrown down into the fiery furnace. So listen, they don't even get a chance to go home and change, okay? They're still in all of their outside clothes. Imagine, you've got your jacket on, you got your hat on, you got shoes on, you're ready to go. And he says, nope, bind them up, they're going. Okay, this is it, I'm done, they're going. So then he's going to throw them into the fiery furnace. In verse 22, because the king's order was so urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men, the men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? So his guards, his army who tied these men up and go to throw them in, they are incinerated. Wait a second. This fiery furnace is so hot that's coming out of here, the men who hold them immediately are just no more. But Shadrach and Meshach are still alive falling into the furnace. Okay? So that's really interesting that they're even closer to it and they're still alive going in it. Okay? So it said, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Okay? So who really puts them in the fire?
God.
God uses gravity to make sure that they go in there. Okay? Because the armed guards are getting ready to push them in and they die. And they're still standing there. And God's like, all right, we're going to go in the furnace. We're going to go in the furnace, but it's not going to be by their hands. It's going to be by mine. Okay? So God is absolutely allowing this to happen. Okay? So they fall down into the fiery furnace. Verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and he rose up in haste. Okay? King Nebuchadnezzar is obviously watching all of this go down. Okay? He's watching all of this go down and he's probably like, all right, that's done and over with. But then something catches his eye. And he gets up. And he's like, oh my gosh, does anybody see what I'm seeing right now? Right? And he declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? It's like, wait, okay, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? We threw 3 guys in there. Am I crazy here? We threw 3 guys in there. And they said, yeah, true, King. We threw 3 guys in there. Nebuchadnezzar Nebuchadnezzar, he answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. In the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Or some translations say, son of God. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar sees 3 guys and a 4th who's very different from the other ones. He looks like a son of the gods. Has Nebuchadnezzar probably seen a son of a god? Probably not. So there's something really different about this 4th guy. But what's interesting is that they're no longer bound, right? Nebuchadnezzar had tied them up so much that they couldn't even move, and now they're just walking around in the fire, completely unbound, and now this 4th guy's in here. He's like, did we throw anybody in there before we threw them 3 in there? Right? Was there somebody else left over? He's like, this guy's really different. He looks like a son of the gods. Okay? 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door, right? He's like this, like coming near the door of the fiery furnace because he saw what happened to his guards, right? He comes as close as he dares, and he declares, so he shouts down, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Okay? Come out of there and come here, because we're going to have another chat. Okay? I need to know what's going on. Then Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego came out from the fire. Okay? Then the straps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together. So they're going to go through an inspection here. Okay? Nebuchadnezzar wants to know what in the world's going on. So there's going to be an inspection. So they gathered them together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of these men. The hair on their heads were not singed. Their cloaks were not harmed. They had even no smell of fire had come upon them. They didn't even smell like fire. I don't know if you've been anywhere near a fire. Your hair smells like smoke. Whether you were the one who made the fire or not, if you're around it, you smell like smoke. Okay? They did not even smell like smoke. Their hair wasn't singed. Okay? Their cloaks weren't even touched. God had preserved even the clothes on their back. Okay? And 28 says, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel. Wait a second. Nebuchadnezzar, you called him a son of a god. Now you're changing your mind. Now he's just an angel. So he's demoted now the other person in there. He sent a messenger, an angel, and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And he set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. So Nebuchadnezzar is recognizing their God did this because of their choice. Okay? Therefore I make a decree. King Nebuchadnezzar likes to make decrees. He's going to make another decree here. Here's the decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. Now, if you weren't here last week, I explained what the Babylonians did when they meant being torn limb from limb. So they would take you out to the forest, and they would find 4 trees that were pretty close together, and they would pull the top of the tree down to the ground, and they would tie it off. Okay? Then they would tie your arms and your legs to the 4 trees. And then they would cut the rope. And the 4 trees would go back to standing position and you went into 4 pieces. That's how they torn people limb from limb. We have this documentation from the Babylonians. But that wasn't good enough, right? Because you're dead at that point. Okay? Then they would go to your house and they would burn all of your stuff and burn your house down. Okay? Now, that was kind of a little bit of an extreme because can a dead man do anything with the possessions of their house? No. But it was a warning. Because if you saw your neighbor's house on fire, right, and he didn't come home, you knew what happened to him. So it was a warning to your neighbors of what was going to happen. Okay? So he says, anybody who speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. So Nebuchadnezzar is recognizing, I have never seen any of my gods be able to rescue somebody like this. So verse 30 says, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So they had already been promoted once, right? He gives them another promotion. It's not going to go good for the other prefects. They're really not going to like this. They get another promotion, okay? So they're even higher up in the province of Babylon. All right, so in all of this, Nebuchadnezzar recognizes the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But again, he's saying that this God is a God among other gods. So he is not denouncing his own gods. He is not denouncing the gods of Babylon. He is just saying that this one likes to meddle in the affairs of men, okay? He saves those who are loyal and faithful to him. So he's verbally recognizing all of this. But what we're going to realize is that he hasn't made the switch for inward, okay? Because the very next chapter, we are going to see that in mega 4K, that Nebuchadnezzar has not made the move from acknowledging that this God exists, that he protects those who are loyal and faithful to him, that he can save people out of a fiery furnace. Because in verse 15, what did he say? What did Nebuchadnezzar ask Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Who is the God who's going to get you out of my hands? Guess what? He just met him in the flesh. He just met the God who took him out of his hands. Okay? So he recognizes, yep, their God's real. Their God's going to save them. But he just recognizes him among every other God that he knows. So he has not made a personal connection that this is a God who is worth Nebuchadnezzar changing. Okay? But he wants everybody in the providence to not say anything about him. Right? Okay? This is very different because his statue still stands. Right? He doesn't demolish his statue. He doesn't say, now you need to fall down and worship the God of Nebuchadnezzar. Right? Because he realizes that forcing loyalty is not the way to win over the heart of a god. Okay? He's seen that. But he does put this decree into royal law that anyone who speaks against their God is going to be killed. Okay? Same level as treason. Alright. So, this is an effective testimony. Okay? But it doesn't even get to the heart of the king. And we're going to talk about that next week. We're going to find out what happens to Nebuchadnezzar. Because in chapter 4, we find out what all of Nebuchadnezzar's pride is going to lead up to. It's going to lead up to a very interesting result. But before we get there, we have a couple of questions in this story. Can anyone think of a question after you hear all of this? Anything stick out to you? So when you read the story, in the light of Daniel chapter 1 and Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 3, we're missing somebody.
Daniel.
Where's Daniel? Right? This is the book of Daniel. We've read all about Daniel. And then chapter 3, Daniel's missing. So we go, where's Daniel? Right? That's the big question in chapter 3. Where's Daniel at? We're told about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but we always hear the four together, right? Okay? We don't know. We don't know where Daniel was. We can bet you Daniel wasn't at the foot of that statue falling down at the sound of the music. We can bet Daniel wasn't there not bowing down because he would have been in the fiery furnace too. So there's a caveat to the decree. Only those who fall down and worship are those who hear it. So our best guess is that Daniel wasn't in listening range. Because remember, he had been promoted. It is quite possible that Nebuchadnezzar had sent him on a journey to another country in order to have diplomatic talks or things like that. So he might have been somewhere else outside of the province of Babylon, outside of the ability to come and worship at the statue. Okay? So it is quite possible that Daniel was not physically there. because we know he wouldn't have fallen down. We know if he had, he would have been in the furnace with the other three. So the best guess that we have is that he wasn't even there among it. But we have the recording of what happened during that day. So you could probably bet that when Daniel comes back home, his three friends tell him what happened, right? He's like, Daniel, while you were away, you'll never guess what happened, okay? You'll never guess what King Nebuchadnezzar did to us. We ended up in the fire. Come smell my clothes. They don't even smell like smoke, right? And you'll never guess what. This guy showed up in the furnace. But we don't know from the record if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego even saw the other guy in the furnace. Who sees the fourth guy in the furnace? Nebuchadnezzar.
So he could have told him what happened.
Do you think that when Daniel came back and reported back to Nebuchadnezzar, that Nebuchadnezzar told him?
Heck no.
Daniel, I'm never going to guess what happened while you were gone. I threw your three friends in the fire furnace and this other guy shows up out of nowhere. Daniel, it was crazy. Nobody else believes me because nobody else saw it. All of the other people around him, because he says, guys, don't you see this fourth person? And they're like, no, we only threw three in there. Nebuchadnezzar saw the fourth person. We have no idea if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do. We have no record of if they saw him or not. They could have. Or they could have just seen the results. That their ropes fall down and their ropes just go away. And that they can walk around the fiery furnace, right? This must have been a pretty big fiery furnace because they're just walking around. This is nice. I like this. Who did this work inside here? This is nice. Like, right? They're just walking around. We have no interaction between them and the fourth man. So we don't even know if they saw him. Nebuchadnezzar did. So Nebuchadnezzar has a dream and gets interpreted of what's going to happen in the latter days. He sees this fourth man walking around this furnace, right? God is intervening in Nebuchadnezzar's life. He is screaming at him, okay? Nebuchadnezzar doesn't hear. He doesn't hear, okay? And we're going to see that in chapter 4, that after everything that Nebuchadnezzar has gone through, he still doesn't hear the God of the universe screaming at him. And he's next, okay? God is giving him encounter after encounter after encounter, and he doesn't get it, okay? God's going to one-up him one more time. He's going to give him one more opportunity, which is what we're going to see in chapter 4. All right, so God allows our faith to be tested, because is this the first test of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? No, they got tested all the way back in chapter 1, right? They got tested in going to Babylon, right? Because you could easily, end your own life instead of being exiled. So they had to have enough faith that God was going to take them to Babylon and they were going to get to come back. They got tested to eat, right? They had their names changed. They had their intellect changed. They weren't going to eat their food. That was another test, right? The test of all of us are getting ready to be killed if no one interprets this dream. So Daniel comes and asks them, let's have a prayer meeting. They could have gotten up, I'm going back to bed, Daniel, right? They get up out of their beds and they ask the God for mercy. So that's another test. And then this test. So do you see how these tests build, right? We don't start out just being thrown into a fiery furnace. God is going to build our faith all along the way. But he saw their faithfulness all along the way, so that by the time this test comes, he knows their true character. He knows what's going to happen. He knows that they're not going to fall down, and he is going to be waiting for them in the furnace, okay? Because Nebuchadnezzar didn't say a man appeared in the fiery furnace. He just sees God's already there with them, okay? Now, again, we don't know if they saw the man in there with them. Okay? They could have just seen the results of what is happening. We don't know. Okay? So these tests are going to come. There's no getting around that fact. And the tests are going to be even harder. Okay? But God is going to make it abundantly clear, I am with you. Okay? I am here with you. I've got you. Okay? Now, Nebuchadnezzar says that this person that's in the fiery furnace with him is an angel, and that word just means messenger, right? So there's this intervening person between the divine and us. That's what an angel would be. Or he's a son of a little g god. So this would have been a demigod, part God, part human, right? Who is this person who stands between the divine and humanity, and who is a son of God? This is Jesus. Absolutely. There is no getting around this fact. This is absolutely Jesus. In a pre-incarnate form, in human flesh, standing in the fire with them. This is not a smoky, white, pillowy angel that's just coming, right? It's not Michael and Gabriel. This is Jesus, who has shown up beforehand. This is an incredible encounter that we get in the Old Testament. And it's only one of two that we can really pinpoint, okay? And we know this is Jesus, okay? This is God sending Jesus to try to reach Nebuchadnezzar. He didn't have to reach Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They already knew. Their faith had already been tested. They had already decided back in the throne room what was going to happen, right? He's like, listen, you throw us in the fiery furnace, but we're not going to worship your God. And if we die, we die, right? So was God really testing them? No. He was really reaching out to Nebuchadnezzar because Nebuchadnezzar saw with his own eyes a son of a God, a person who stands between the divine and humanity in the fire with him. And I bet you he locked eyes with Nebuchadnezzar, right? As a warning, because he doesn't say anything. But he shows himself very clear. I am the God who can rescue anybody I want to. I am a God who's more powerful than you, and I don't have to build a 90-foot statue to prove it, right? I sent you a dream as a warning, and I am here physically as a warning. And we're going to find out Nebuchadnezzar only has one more shot, okay? He gets one more shot between this divine God that he is meeting for the first time in these Jews. Okay? So they get to walk out of the fire, out of the freedom, and they get to tell everyone what happened. And this decree goes out. Okay? They get to tell everybody what happened to them for the rest of their lives, what God did for them. And Nebuchadnezzar gets to tell everybody for the rest of his life what happened. Okay? That they got to walk out of the fiery furnace. They're the only three who got to walk out of the fiery furnace. That even in the midst of Nebuchadnezzar's mercy, he cranked up that furnace and they walked out of even that. Okay? 7 times hotter, Nebuchadnezzar's act of mercy, and God used for his act of deliverance. Right? So he is turning up the furnace because he just wants to get rid of these people. Like, I'm just done. And God delivers them out of even that. So, God at some point is going to call you to walk through a fiery season, and probably more than once. He's going to call you some really, really hard and difficult things. Okay? You may never, ever see him in the midst of all of it. And I pray that you do. I pray that you get to see it. But you will if you look for the results, right? Because all they had to do was look down and realize, oh, the ropes are gone and we're not dead. They probably thought they were, right? They probably went, is this shield? Like, that's what they were probably looking for. Like, are we in shield, right? Are we done? And they're walking around, and then they get to walk out of it. And they go stand before the king, because king goes, come here. I have to know what happened, right? I gotta examine what in the world happened here. What did your God do for you, right? That's what God's gonna call you to. Not only is he going to call you to walk through the furnace, but at some point after that, somebody's going to examine your life and go, what? How did you get through that? Right? How in the world did you go through that? Nebuchadnezzar knows. He tells them. He was like, your God sent a messenger to deliver you out of my hand. Right? And then he promotes them. Right? He's like, the only thing I can do here, fellas, is I can give you more power. I can give you more here in this world. Right? I can give you more responsibility. Now remember, these are teenagers. These are only 17, 18, 19-year-old guys, and now they're moving up in the world. They're moving up even more. But I tell you what happened the first time where they got promoted and a big old target got painted on their back, it's going to have an even bigger target painted on their back. Right? Nebuchadnezzar's trying to win the favor of these guys, right? He's trying to give them a reward, and unfortunately, he's only going to paint an even bigger target on them. Okay? This mirrors our life. We're going to go through all of these different challenges, and at somewhere along the way, you're going to be asked about for something that's not God. Whether physically, okay, because I guarantee it's coming in our world today, it's coming, or spiritually, down to something that is not your God. And the results are going to be really real, okay? If you don't do this, the results are going to be really real. And here in America, we don't usually consider this, okay? This is like, we've got freedom of speech, right? At any point along the way, that freedom is probably going to be taken away from us, okay? They're already trying to do it in our upstairs neighbors, okay? If you haven't heard that, go Google Canada, okay? They are trying to remove the ability of freedom of religious speech in Canada right now as we speak. At some point, it's going to come here too.
It's already on its way here. You're going to feel it.
It's coming. So, the thing to remember is that we do not have to be afraid. Okay? Nowhere in there do we read that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were afraid, but I guarantee you their knees were knocking when they were getting close to that fire. Okay? They had full confidence that either God's going to deliver us out of this or we're going to go see him. Those are the only two choices we have here. Okay? And that faith is what had them called out. Because they had so much faith and trust in God that God was going to do whatever he wants to do. We're going to leave the results up to God, but there's only two ways we're getting out of this. We're either coming back out of the furnace or we get to go home. Those are the only two options that we have. Okay? But I bet you when they walked towards that furnace, they didn't know what was going to happen. Okay? And I'm sure they expected it to be painful, mercifully quick, and especially when the guys next to them disintegrate. Right? Could you imagine?
That was going through their head at that time. As
Right?
those people like are disintegrating and they're just like, oh.
Right? We're bound, and the guys next to me just disintegrate out of nowhere. And now it's my turn. Right? So I'm sure they experienced fear. There was no lack of fear here. Right? But God was still with them. And God was going to show his hand of mercy. And not just his hand, he's going to send Jesus, his whole body, his son, right there with them. Okay? So, I want you to see in all of this that this is not a test of Daniel. And this is not a test of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This book should really be called a test of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? For at least the first 4 chapters, we see Nebuchadnezzar tested. And Nebuchadnezzar tested. And Nebuchadnezzar tested. He's failed every test so far. And he's got one more. Okay? So chapter 4, we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar's final test in a second dream. This was his first dream. God's going to speak to him in another dream. Okay? Alright, so, other questions, other concerns, other comments about the fiery furnace? It's a little more than the, pictograph pictures, right? You really get to see, when you put it in context of the whole, really what God was trying to say here. And he was speaking to both. He was speaking to those of us who follow him, and we can walk through the fire, right? And he's going to be there. But that he always gives every person an opportunity to come to him. And he shouts it if we're listening. Most of us aren't listening. He is shouting down to Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar, I want you. And Nebuchadnezzar doesn't hear him. Okay? I don't want you to miss that part of this. This is not just about Daniel and his 3 friends. This is absolutely about Nebuchadnezzar. Because Nebuchadnezzar rules a very big chunk of the world right now. Okay? And he has influence over this huge population of people. He gets them to fall down and worship a 90-foot statue of himself. Okay? And they do it. Okay? So he has great influence, and God wants to get a hold of Nebuchadnezzar. He has one more opportunity. So are you liking the book of Daniel? And we're only 3 chapters in. We have lots more stories, lots more prophecy. We're going to get very deep into prophecy at the end of Daniel. But God doesn't want us to be afraid of what's coming. Okay? That's also a theme as we're heading towards a whole list of prophecies, and a lot of prophecies that are very uncomfortable to read. Don't be afraid. Okay? I know it all. I'm with you in it all. I've got it all. Let me handle the results. Okay? You just keep doing what I ask you to do, and let me handle